understand that the external audit of the financial statements have their limitations. It's not a forensic audit. It does not involve a detailed examination of all of the transactions. And while we also review your internal controls for financial reporting, as I mentioned earlier, and also to help us design or determine the higher risk area when we perform our risk assessments, the external audit, the purpose or the objectives of the external audit do not include expressing an opinion about your district's the effectiveness of your internal control system. Now, if we do come across control deficiencies or areas where there are weaknesses that we believe warrant your attention, we will, of course, report that to you. But it is not part of the official auditor's report on your district's financial statements. Okay. As I mentioned, external audit do not involve a detailed examination of all of the transactions. It involves sample testing and also involves risk assessment. Now, every year, we look at the district's operations, looking at prior year's audit results to give us an idea of where the higher risk areas might be in terms of cycle, cash disbursements and purchasing, and cash disbursements, payroll, cash receipts. And then, from that point on, we determine what the a reasonable sample size would be in terms of our audit testing. And when we perform our audit, when we test those samples, if we come across exceptions, then we will expand on those sample size until we're satisfied that what we noticed or what we noted initially was not a systemic failure or deficiency, and is more of a one-off or isolated incident. Our responsibilities, they are actually quite broad. We have to perform the audit by following the auditing standards issued by our profession, the AICPA, formerly known as Generally Accepted Auditing Standards, or GAS. We also have to, because you are a local government, we have to, the audit of your financial statements are also subject to the federally issued government auditing standards, GAGAS or GAGAS. And finally, the aforementioned Federal Single Audit Act. That's under the direction of the Federal Office of Management and Budget. And every year, first of all, they issue a compliance supplement every year that have most of the programs that would be subject to federal single audit. And essentially, those are the audit programs that auditors have to follow in performing these federal single audits. Okay. The federal government, the OMB, issued a set of guidelines called Uniform Guidance. Okay. And those are the guidance that all recipients of federal awards, really doesn't matter how much money or how much you receive in terms of federal awards. If you get federal dollars to supplement your programs, you have to follow those uniform guidance. And when we perform the audit, we also have to look at uniform guidance for many areas, whether it's purchasing or policies and procedures. And those uniform guidance, is crucial for not only auditors but also auditees to understand. Next page, page full of some of the responsibilities that belong to district management. Okay, the annual financial statements and the company financial information. Okay, that seems pretty straightforward. I want to remind you that just as a matter of course, the external auditors have been preparing your financial statements after we perform the audit. We have all the information, and we agree with whatever adjustments, if any, with the business office. Then we would proceed to draft the financial statements on behalf of the district, and we can still do that. Now, in recent years, there have been a lot of concerns from outside parties that if auditors might lose their independence if they are deemed to really perform the audit and do everything for the management. And the main question being, okay, if the auditor prepared the financial statements and somehow they made a mistake or two, if the management does not have the expertise or does not have the experience to or take the responsibility to review the draft financial statements and actually be able to find those errors, then there is a breakdown in terms of internal control, as well as a possible independence issue on the part of the external auditors. So we're very careful with every engagement in terms of deciding or accepting to actually prepare the draft financial statements. We have to look at your personnel, okay? Who is at the business office, looking at the interaction that we have throughout the audit, whether or not they take the financial statements and ask pointed and good questions. And your office, between Olivia and Janet, they have checked those boxes. So we are, once again, we continue to be comfortable that our independence is intact, even though we will continue to draft your financial statements. So 5 minutes later, this is why I wanted to talk about the first bullet point. The annual financial statements, even though we draft them for you, it's still your responsibilities. These are your financial statements. And therefore, district management is responsible for overseeing this non-audit services, this non-audit service that we provide for. Establishing and maintaining effective internal controls. Once again, we're here once a year. We review your internal controls, and we'll let you know. And between the internal auditors and the external auditors, and occasionally the comptroller's auditors as well. This is where district will have an opportunity to continue to tighten up internal controls, and ultimately it is district management's responsibility to make sure that you have effective internal controls to ensure your compliance with laws and regulations, and also to prevent and detect fraud. If management is aware of significant deficiencies in the internal control, or if management is aware of any fraud or allegations of fraud being committed against the district, it is management's responsibility to let us know, so that we can plan for those deficiencies, as well as potential fraudulent transactions. Making all financial records available to us, allowing us access to district personnel whom we deem necessary for us to speak with or to obtain audit information or documentation from. And also adjusting financial records, should we propose any audit adjustments at the conclusion of the audit. And lastly, but not least, we will require district management, in this case, Dr. Gerizzo, and Olivia, Ms. Blazzi, to sign off on a management representation letter, basically, just taking ownership of the financial statements, and this is standard procedure, and all external audits are released only after the management representation letters are received. All right, the next page, I'm talking about the audit methodology and approach. Basically, it's split up into several phases. The initial phase is the audit planning and the risk assessment phase. This is where we would contact district personnel, interview district personnel, and discuss with them, find out from them about the current fiscal year's procedures, as well as internal controls. We don't assume that nothing changed from a year ago. We have our audit documentation from a year ago, and we will sit down. In this case, probably we'll do it remotely, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But in a normal year, we would sit down with district personnel and go over those internal procedures and controls. We will also reach out to the internal auditors and the claims auditor and obtain their reports and interview them to help us get an understanding of how serious the district management takes internal controls, whether or not they saw anything, control deficiencies, if you would, during the year. Keeping in mind, once again, external auditors, of course, visit your district, a couple of times a year, but your internal auditors and your claims auditors, they are there basically throughout the year. So their reports and their insight would provide us with good information to plan for our audit. Also, if there have been a state audit, we would also request, whether it's a final report or a draft report, we'll request a copy from the district. And just once again, similar to the interview and the review of internal audit reports, to help us understand what kind of deficiencies, if any, those other auditors might have seen. And at this point in time, we'll also look at the general ledger and the trial balances and look at some of the revenues and the expenditures, and help us form form some expectation as to, okay, it's looking like perhaps one area's expenditures are a lot higher than the original budget. So we'll check that off. We'll put that down as part of the one of the areas that we will look at when we come back and perform the audit after the books are closed. Controls evaluation and testing will also be done at this point, at this time, the audit planning phase. As I mentioned earlier, we look at payroll, purchasing and cash disbursement, cash receipts, accounting information system, the Envision system that that your district uses, and the bank reconciliation process, as well as budgetary transfers and authorizations. Those are some of the areas that we, internal controls that we will review and test. Okay. All right, the next page, substantive testing. This phase is done in the summer after the books are closed. Of course, each fiscal year end is June 30th. Typically, it takes anywhere from 7 to 8 weeks. I would say the third week of August, even sometimes the fourth week of August, depending on the personnel availability. But that tends to be the sweet spot. Okay? The third week of August is usually when most districts are really ready. Okay, so in terms of scheduling, Olivia, correct me if I'm wrong. I believe typically you've been getting the third week of August as far as the audit timetable.
Yes, that's true.
Right. So so you have you've got the sweet spot. So that's when we come in for that substantive part of the audit. That's when we test the significant account balances. Making sure that they are supported by underlying documents and information. We look at the restricted reserves activities throughout the year, making sure that I's were dotted, T's were crossed, and you have the proper authorizations from the board or from the public. If it involves the capital reserve. Okay. Capital projects expenditures, that's another area, because capital projects oftentimes could span multiple years. We make sure that in part of our audit that the district does not overcommit or overspend the voter authorized amounts. Okay. And then there are some third-party reports that are that will be available later on. Typically, you won't get these third-party reports until possibly August or even September. Capital assets inventory report is one of those. The district would provide updates, and depending on whether or not they would go on site and perform a full valuation, a full inventory. If it's not a full inventory, a full valuation year, then the district will send a list of updates after the close of the fiscal year to the capital assets management company, who in turn then send back a set of reports. Then district's business office will have to review those draft reports before they can provide them to us for audit. It seems fundamental, but you'd be surprised how some of your colleagues, Olivia, seem to just skip over that step. They just hit forward to Alan. We're all humans, so we've seen it. Even as professional as they might be, capital assets inventory reports are only as good as the information provided to them. But sometimes these capital assets management companies also, they could make some judgmental decisions without consulting with their clients. It's hard to believe, but it has happened before. So once again, it's very important that before we get these reports, that the business office review the draft reports and making sure that they make sense compared to last year's ending balances, and they also make sense compared to what you provided to them for update. Other third-party reports are primarily actuarial reports. You have to obtain actuarial reports for your OPEB program, the other post-employment benefits. Okay, that's the health insurance for retirees. So every year you have to get an actuarial report. Every other year, that report has to be a full valuation, which of course will be reflected in the pricing. In addition to that, pricing from the actuaries. In addition to that, you have the TRS and the ERS actuarial reports. They have, because of GASB 68, local governments are required to include their proportionate share of pension liability, net pension liability, or net pension asset in the case of the TRS for the last couple of years on your financial statements. So that information, those reports come from the TRS and the ERS, and they're usually available sometime in July, late July, early August for the ERS. The TRS's report is already available because we're taking information from one fiscal year ago. Okay, so we're going to be using their June 30th, 2019 actuarial report. When reporting on your district's June 30, 2020 financial statements, that is acceptable by GASB standard. And quite frankly, if they didn't allow for that, then there is no way that there is a very good chance that you wouldn't be able to finalize your audit until much later, because for the TRS, it would take them. For the ERS, the year end was March, so it took KPMG, their auditors, 4 months to finalize the report. KPMG is also the TRS's external auditors, and their year end is June 30th. So if we follow the same 4-month timeline, now we're talking about the end of October. So I think it just from a practical standpoint, the GASB had to allow for that. All right, and then after we've obtained our audit evidence, we would perform one final analytical review of the balances, and that's designed to help us make sure that once again we are satisfied as to the audit documentation that we have obtained. Completion and reporting, as I mentioned, we will be assisting the district with the preparation of the financial statements and the disclosures. Once that part is done, as I mentioned earlier, we do go through the draft financial statements with Olivia and Janet, and making sure that whatever questions they may have are answered, or if they happen to notice something, then we can adjust those before making those draft audit reports available to the audit committee. And then we will, of course, I will then meet with you again as the audit committee and go over the draft audit, the results of the audit. And after that, as was the case in the last couple of years, whatever changes and revisions the audit committee wishes to make to the financial statements, we will make those changes, and then we can issue the final financial statements. And the federal single audit report, usually it's due 9 months after the close of the fiscal year. So for June 30, 2020, the single audit's due date is March 31st of 2021. I'll take this opportunity to just talk about the June 30, 2019 federal single audit report, which we're close to completion. There's some follow-up testing that we needed to do, and then the COVID-19 happened. But because of that, the federal government has granted a 6-month extension on the June 30th, 2019, the federal single audit. So now the single audit for June 30th, 2019 will be due by September 30th. Now, we don't expect to have to wait that long, but there are certain follow-up testings that we needed to do. And in reaching out to Janet, obviously the administrative office is still closed right now. So there's some documentation that cannot be provided to us at this point. So we're kind of in a holding pattern as far as the June 30, 2019 federal single audit is concerned. So I thought I'd just bring this up because, in the past, this is the meeting that I would usually go over the single audit report with you as well. Okay. The next page, the audit timetable. Yes.
Hi, so Peter, if you need documents from the district, if you want to email us, we can try to figure out how to get them to you so you can keep your.
Okay.
I wanted to ask about that also, because clearly there have been people in and out of the business office, so it seems like we should be able to find a way to wrap that up.
Okay, that's great. Then I will have Raul Perez. He's the audit supervisor. I will have him reach out to Janet and Olivia and try to coordinate that.
Sure.
Okay, great. Thank you.
In fact, they did give us a list for the upcoming audit, and we are putting it together as we speak.
Right. So this is where the timetable here, audit planning, risk assessment phase. On this page to be determined. Then I put down some work to be done remotely, and as Olivia just mentioned, with the requirement to work from home or to stay away from offices. Currently, I guess no end in sight. I guess May 15th currently. So nevertheless, we want to try to move the upcoming audit along. And so we have prepared and we have sent to Olivia and Janet a list of information that, most of which we believe can be produced remotely and either uploaded onto our portal or email over to us so that and there's still work that we can do remotely without access to the district office. So that's what we're trying to do and trying to keep the audit moving along so that when we do all go back to work, go back to the offices, we're not faced with any undue delay, and hopefully to try to keep everybody on track once again. The state has indicated that at this point, because I guess it's still too far ahead, they have not talked about any kind of extensions as far as ST3 is concerned. So SPM1 and ST3. So just so you know. So the plan, we're still anticipating to perform the substantive audit phase sometime in August, and put down September also because, as I mentioned earlier, some of the reports won't become available until later on in the summer. Okay. And then once that's done, I anticipate coming back and meet with you for the reporting phase sometime in October. Okay, page 8, engagement management team. I am back as your audit partner, and assisting me once again is Raul Perez, our audit supervisor. I do want to mention that this is the 5th year of our first proposal. So it's been a great 4 years, and I look forward to another good audit for the 5th year. And I understand next month, over the next couple of months, you'll be reviewing and assessing audit proposals, and I look forward to discussing those with you if necessary. Okay. All right, so that's the audit plan. So before I get into the recent accounting standards, does anyone have any questions?
Sure. Can you talk more about, let's say we still have stay-at-home orders in August, or barring that, we still have substantial social distancing requirements. Are there any real barriers to completing the audit?
Well, it will add time because, as I mentioned, I think technology is such that a lot of the work really can be done remotely. But at the end of the day, we still need to look at vouchers in terms of for some of the items that we will be testing. But I believe we can try to overcome them by coordinating. While traditionally auditors would go on site, we'll block off a week, we'll go there, and we'll focus on getting everything. But at the conclusion of the week, there would still be some open items anyway. So there will be information that would still go back and forth between the auditors and the district. And those will be done for the most part electronically. And then sometimes, if necessary, I do send a team back for a day or two, for follow-up procedures if necessary. But I think it can be overcome, but it will take a little bit more time. For instance, coordinating, if we pull the sample ahead of time, then, Olivia and Jenna can coordinate to have someone, whoever, based on their staggered schedule, maybe go in and pull the information ahead of time. And then, if at that point, if the board and Peter and Olivia, if all of you are comfortable, we can even send someone there for a day, just to practice social distancing. So all of that, it's up in the air right now. Since last month, we've also suspended all client appointments and meetings, and we don't want to obviously put our staff at risk, nor do we want to put our clients' staff at risk. So it's. I think it's still too far away to say whether or not we definitely will be impacted. But I think with technology and with careful coordination and some patience, I think it still can be done.
Yeah, I was going to say, I just want to follow up on that for attorneys, we're allowed under the guidelines to have clients in as long as we keep the 6 feet apart. So when this whole discussion was going on, I don't understand why the documents can't be put in the conference room and Janet is in the back in her office, or Olivia, and you have your people in the conference room. I mean, as long as everyone is 6 feet apart,
right. Well,
and you didn't even wear gloves. I mean, doesn't seem right. I mean, that's how we're handling it.
We can certainly right, and this is my understanding is that at least up until this point, the administrative office is officially closed. Correct. Correct,
but we can open it.
Okay, so once again,
people can go in.
It's so right. It's something that at the same time we also want to make sure that our staff is comfortable. Because it's something that we're conscious of, and we certainly don't want to force someone to go to a client's place. Now, I think our staff will be reasonable. And, right now everybody is required to wear a mask when they go out anyway. So, if, just take the remainder of the federal single audit documentation, that would be a good test. And I think, that takes coordination once again, and so that everybody can come to an agreement.
Are we allowed to ship documents that you need to see, or is there some reason that the documents have to stay in our office to be viewed? I apologize that I don't know this.
I think, first of all, auditors we have to look at original documents. So in terms of your record retention, it gets dicey because we certainly, if something went missing, we certainly don't want to be, the party responsible for losing the documentation. Not to say that we won't be careful with them, but that I'm not sure. As far as the legal requirement, as far as your original documents, can they be shipped to us, and then we ship them back to you. So that's something that perhaps the attorneys can clarify.
I think all the spreadsheet and then all the projections and everything else that we do, which is not original document, are usually sent to you anyway.
Yes.
It is the invoices that we have to be worried about. And
correct.
Between Janet and I, we can coordinate it. I'll be in my room, they'll be in their room, and we can get it done.
I think it'll be fine. In terms of Marion, just to circle back to you, I think it will be fine. But once again, I'm one of 6 partners. I'm not going to unilaterally make a decision for the firm and for the firm staff. But it's something that we as a partnership will continue to discuss, and certainly if it can be coordinated, we'll inform our staff and try to maybe take the temperature, so to speak, and see how they feel.
Right. Listen, no one wants to put anyone at risk, but me, I go to the office with Lysol and wipes and a mask and gloves. I mean, they have eased the restrictions for attorneys in terms like I've notarized electronically, which you would never do before via FaceTime and Zoom, because I'm now allowed to do that, which I never was allowed before.
Right.
But, the guidelines that we have allow us to meet with clients just 6 feet apart.
Right. Okay.
Likewise, you can imagine it might not be impossible either for them to examine documents remotely with Zoom or FaceTime. But I think the larger point is that the board's trying to express that we very much depend upon the audit and want to make sure we have that information in as timely a manner as we can. And
of course, yeah.
We would like to work with you in whatever way to make sure that happens.
Thank you. And then we're just as vested as you are. We do a number of audits, and we can't even start to think, what if everything is pushed back by 3 months? What's going to happen? And so we're every bit as interested as in pushing the audit forward as you are, and try to stay on a timetable. And which is why last week, that's when we sent out the email request to to our clients, including Olivia and Janet, and try to get the information that we need in order for us to get the audit started.
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Okay. All right, so the next page, there are a couple of new accounting standards that will affect your district. First one, GASB Statement 84, fiduciary activities. Originally, it's slated to be effective for this current fiscal year, June 30, 2020. But once again, because of COVID-19, a lot of stakeholders, a lot of local governments have petitioned the GASB to delay the implementation by 1 year. And the GASB has heeded those appeals, and they've actually proposed. They have to go through steps, and they've already issued an exposure draft to propose delaying the implementation of a group of accounting standards, including GASB 84, by 1 year. So, and it's just as well because New York State only just last month, came out with their own guidance as far as how New York State local governments and school districts should tackle GASB Statement 84 fiduciary activities. So what exactly is it? It's a new standard that establishes criteria for all local and state and local governments to identify and report fiduciary activities. Okay. Primarily, the focus is on whether or not the government is controlling the assets. So in this case, most often it's the cash, and whether or not there is actually a fiduciary relationship that exists between the district and the beneficiary. Okay, and activity that meet the criteria. There are a number of criteria, and I'll go over those later on. You have to report them in 4 fiduciary funds: pension and other employee benefit trust funds, investment trust funds, private purpose trust funds, and custodial funds. The first 2 funds you're not going to have. Okay. Once again, the New York State law does not allow state or local governments and school districts to set up trust funds for to fund their pension or their OPEB plans anyway. And as far as school district investments are concerned, there are those 2. There are no investments that would meet the criteria to be included as a fiduciary fund. So that leaves number 3 and 4, according to the State Comptroller's Office for New York State and local governments: private purpose trust fund and custodial funds. Now, in years past, the district scholarship money, okay, those were being reported as private purpose trust fund. Okay? Even though the reality is that that money, the scholarship money, is just sitting in bank accounts. Okay, some districts might have many different bank accounts for each of the scholarship funds. Some district would have them in just one bank account and then allocate interest earnings to it. Okay, so the important differentiation here is that those scholarship funds are not really trust in a trust fund. Okay, and because of that, those scholarship funds will no longer be considered private purpose trust fund in terms of financial reporting. What the GASB then said is that, okay, if you have an activity that does not qualify as a fiduciary activity, so now you will have to report those in a governmental fund. Okay. In the past, private purpose trust fund is part of your trust and agency fund. Okay, it's considered not part of your primary government. Okay, if you would. With GASB 84, okay, that changes quite a bit. Okay, so starting with the scholarship funds, because they're not, it's not set up as a trust. Okay, it's just bank accounts controlled by the district. And as a matter of fact, most oftentimes the high school guidance office, the district would very much be involved in determining who would get the scholarship award at the end of a school year. Okay, so the scholarship funds will have to be reported in a governmental fund. What's a governmental fund? Your general fund is a governmental fund. Your school lunch fund is a governmental fund. Okay, your special aid fund, that's a governmental fund. So what is the GASB here saying then? So in the simplest term, you can say, well, the GASB really wants you would have to roll your scholarship activities into the general fund. Okay, now I can already see all kinds of problems with that. Okay, how are you affecting the budget? Okay, so what is the revenue coming in, gifts and donations, and then the expenditures going out, the scholarship awards. What do we call that? So what my firm is discussing, and that's also coming from looking at the bulletin that was issued by the State Comptroller's Office last week. I think the way to go would be to carve out the scholarship funds into a separate, what we call non-major governmental fund, but make that part of your primary government. Okay, so that it would still meet the criteria as being reported in a governmental fund, but that way it doesn't affect your general fund. It doesn't infect your general fund. Okay. And then other changes that will definitely affect the district's business office in terms of the financial reporting, payroll withholdings. Okay. Traditionally, those were considered agency fund liabilities because we've always been told by the GASB that, well, these are really monies that belong to the federal and state government in terms of payroll withholdings or the unions. Therefore, it's a liability in the agency fund. It's not part of your primary government. Well, GASB did an 180 in terms of those payroll withholdings liabilities with GASB 84. They now take the position that, well, these are really the school district's liabilities to pay over to the government, the various federal and state governments and the unions, and therefore payroll withholdings like balances at the end of the year will no longer be reported in the agency fund. You will have to move them into the general fund. Now, that's not really a big deal because there's usually an asset associated with a liability. It's between cash or due from general fund would be the asset, and then the liability is the withholding liability. So it's really simply a transfer of the asset and liability, and just include them in the general fund. So that's really not a big change. For us, what would be the most significant change potentially would be the ECAF, the extra classroom activities funds. Okay, so at the outset, many CPAs, we've been talking before the state, took their official stand. We've been saying that, wait a minute, these are clearly not district funds. Okay, the funds were not derived from the district revenues. Okay? The payments out of these extra classroom activity clubs are directed by the student treasurers, the student officers themselves, and they 99.5% of the time do not benefit the school district. The rare exception being, maybe a club decided to make a donation to the school district, but most of the time, the payments don't. The district would not be a beneficiary of these extra classroom activity funds payments. Okay. The sticky point with GASB 84 in terms of determining what's a fiduciary activity has to do with administrative control. Okay, and within GASB 84, it states that an auditee and organization has to evaluate an activity by looking at whether or not the assets were being controlled by the government. Yes, it is. Okay, because the bank accounts are, even though you have central treasurers, right? The district bank accounts, those accounts are open in the district's tax ID number, okay? And as far as the administrative control, the GASB believes that if the school district, in terms of these clubs, if you have a faculty advisor signing off on a disbursement, okay, in a way, basically helping determine whether or not certain purchases are in accordance with policies that the board have established in terms of these extra classroom activities, or also ascertaining that they are in compliance with certain regulations and requirements, that rise to the level of administrative control. And what that means is that if you have administrative control, then it's not a fiduciary activity, and therefore it cannot be accounted for as custodial fund, and it will have to be included in a governmental fund, again, like the scholarship money. Okay? So that's an issue that we as a profession and the State Comptroller's Office actually have gone back and forth over the last few months. And the OSC eventually reached out to the GASB, and I believe they also provided the commissioner's regulations that govern the extra classroom activities to the GASB, and they've come to the conclusion. And Olivia, you probably saw the bulletin already as well, that the OSC believes that most of the school districts, because of those requirements by the commissioners. Regulations, as well as the control and the administrative control that school districts typically would have over these clubs, that the OSC believes that most school districts will have to account for the ECAP as a governmental fund. Okay, so we actually, most of the people in my office tend to agree with that assessment. It's that administrative control that we couldn't get past. Okay. So what that means is, once again, we don't want to corrupt the general fund, and so what we likely would do, and and that would be in coordination with Olivia and with Janet, is also set up a non-major governmental fund, so that it's that would add a couple columns more to your financial statements, but that would satisfy the reporting requirement. The one caveat is that I think the State Comptroller's Office has said that, in one of their webinars, and I'll go back and revisit that, that in order to, for us to be able to do that, or for you to be able to do that, to carve it out as a non-major governmental fund, the board may have to pass a resolution, just basically, stating that, yep, these funds are restricted for the purposes of the individual clubs, and that would make those fund balances restricted fund balances, and now we can call them a special revenue, non-major special revenue fund.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
So the three accounting changes you're talking about between the payroll withholding and the scholarship funds and the club activities don't impact the reality of our finances at all, right?
That is correct.
Does it impact either how the public perceives how much sort of free cash the district has on hand? Does it impact how we calculate our 4% fund balance? Any practical or perceptual impact?
Right. Great question, and which is why, my firm, my office believes that the way to implement that is to have these non-major governmental funds. So there'll be a couple of new funds, but at least it won't be incorporated into your general fund and creating the illusion or the misconception that you have more cash available to you and that you have more restricted reserves now all of a sudden.
Alan, quick question.
Yeah.
Why did they decide to put out this statement number 984 to begin with? What was the impetus for it? What was the reason behind it? What changed?
I think what started the project really had to do with previous standards, other standards about OPEB, GASB 75, and even the pension reporting. Now, in implementing those standards, they received some questions related to reporting trust funds. So then they decided that, well, maybe it's worth looking into, the trust funds and see how we should report those. And that's really that was the genesis of the project that became GASB 84. Okay, so excuse me. So as I mentioned, the proposed delay of the implementation is now in the exposure draft, and the final guidance will come out in a couple of weeks. Officially, May 8th will be the final guidance. Basically, once it's basically a done deal. It's just we're just waiting for the official word. So once again, we're not going to early implement. Number one, because the state gave us so little time. The state really didn't come out with any guidance until a month ago. Amid everything with COVID-19, so most everybody's going to take advantage of the delay guidance, and so this will be, and that will give us a chance to sit down with Olivia, discuss with her, and mind you, also the state still has not come out with all the new account codes yet, so. You cannot even set up the new funds even if you want to. Okay. But,
Alan, I have a question. Do we
yes.
have to include it in the property tax report card because it will give the illusion that is part of our reserves?
No, you won't have to. No, not if they are reported as a new non-major governmental fund that is not part of the general fund. Okay. Okay. There's also one thing that I'm talking about the ECAP, the very last bullet. Okay. That is the one wrinkle. You might remember with the ECAP initial statements, because of the limits, because of the the impossibility of trying to to place internal controls over cash receipts. especially from fundraising. Okay, we have basically issue qualified opinions on your extra classroom financial statements in the past, specifically stating that because there is no way for us to ascertain whether or not a club that brought in $20,000 from fundraising activities, whether or not that represented all of the fundraising proceeds. So by now having to put first of all, the state hasn't said anything about you not having to have a separate audit of the ECAP financial statement yet. They haven't said that. So that will continue to be subject to the external audit. But now the new wrinkle is by including the extra classroom activities in the primary government as part of your financial statements as a non-major fund. That area still has not changed. Once again, we'll evaluate, but there is the likelihood that in your annual financial statements there will now be qualified opinion about the non-major funds cash receipts. Okay. But again, as I said, that's next year. It's not June 30, 2020. It's June 30, 2021 year-end financial statements. Okay, and then the last one, that one is down the pike, and now it's 2 years removed. The last one is GASB Statement 87 in terms of reporting leases. This one was originally slated to be effective in the next fiscal year. Now it's going to be delayed by one more year to 2021-22 when the final guidance from the GASB comes out as well. So primarily, this is traditionally leases, specifically operating leases. They are off balance sheet. They are disclosed in your notes to financial statements, but they are off the balance sheet. And this is really the GASB following the FASB's lead, if you will, in terms of now putting all leases, not just capital leases. Think of capital leases are your installment purchase debt, but also operating leases. They now also want to be, the GASB also wants governments to put those operating leases on the balance sheet, on their balance sheet, because they believe operating leases really, is a form of liability, and therefore they need to be presented on the financial statements. So there will be some impact in 2 years on how they're reported in your general fund. Unlike OPEB and the pension plan and reporting, which only affected the full accrual basis government-wide financial statements. So this 187 will have some impact on the general fund, but it's primarily in terms of account coding. Okay, I'll give you a quick example. If you lease copy machines from BOCES, currently they are simply charged against the 0.49 code on an annual basis. You may lease the copy machine for 5 years. It's charged to the BOCES expenditure code, and there will be a disclosure in the footnotes about the minimum commitment of this operating lease. When GASB 87 becomes effective, you will now have to calculate a present value, really, of the total liability that is this 5-year operating lease liability. And then when you make your payments to BOCES, there will now be some reclassification to be done. That they may have to be reclassified out of the 0.49 codes, and into other expenditure codes that are more in line with principal and interest reduction, if you would. Okay, so that's one of the potential issues that I saw already, because if you don't code something to the 0.49 BOCES code, what's that going to do to your BOCES aid? It may not count. So, that's something that, over the next year and a half or so, that's something that, and BOCES is aware of that as well. That, this is where, once again, government GASB accounting standards, GASB reporting standards are colliding with the reality. And nevertheless, that's something that, that's next year's project between Olivia and us, hopefully us, if we return as your auditors next year. and so that we can get ready for it for the 21-22 fiscal year. Okay, so that's my presentation. I have one more question to ask of audit committee members, whether or not you were made aware of fraud or fraudulent activities.
I was not.
Okay, thank you.
Nope.
Thank you.
I was not.
Thank you.
No.
Thank you. Thank
I
you.
think we maybe still need to hear from Joanna.
Joanna?
Were you made aware of any fraudulent activities this year?
I think you're on mute. You can shake your head, or you can nod, or you can shake your head. Thank you. Mr. Feldman?
Nothing from me.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So we will still, as you might remember from past audits, we will still send out a questionnaire to board members and members of the administration about related party transactions, as well as we will also still have a question about whether or not you're aware of fraud, and between now and when you receive the letter. So please, by all means, answer the questionnaire, and those are the questionnaires that we must receive, all of it, before we can issue the financial statements also. Okay. I thank you for your attention. If you don't have any more questions, then I will sign off, and I will meet you sometime in September, October.
Thank you,
Well,
Alan.
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
for your
Alan.
time.
Thank you.
Anything else for the audit committee? Okay, so we're going to adjourn the audit committee. Ray, we can't thank you enough for joining us under these circumstances that you never anticipated when you originally volunteered. So thank you.
Thank you very much for having me. I just want to say, in case you don't know, just as off topic, on April 25th, HBO will be airing the movie Bad Education about the Raleigh School District. So you may want to see what it's all about.
Yeah.
I wouldn't miss it for the world.
I can't wait, because in all honesty, I expect either Dr. G. Rizzo, his administration, or the Board of Trustees to get questions from the community about that situation and how we basically mitigate potential issues of that nature.
Yeah.
So I just want to throw that out to everybody, and wish everybody well. Everybody be safe.
Thanks, Ray.
You as well.
Okay,
Thank you so much.
you too.
Bye-bye.
Okay, so we're going to adjourn the public session then for the executive committee and go into our scheduled executive session.